The cockpit was ablaze with alarms as Captain Jake Ross frantically wrestled with the controls. Mayday! Mayday! This is Captain Ross, systems failing, I repeat, systems failing. The communication crackled before cutting off entirely. A violent jolt hurled him into his harness as the ship spiraled through a vortex of shimmering lights. Moments later, he woke up groaning, sprawled face-first on a bed of soft, glowing moss. Jake blinked at the surreal landscape around him, bioluminescent trees, floating crystalline rocks, and a sky that shimmered like liquid metal. Well, he muttered, this definitely isn't Kansas. A sharp, musical voice interrupted his thoughts. Are you damaged? Jake turned, and his jaw nearly hit the moss. Before him stood a slender figure, faintly glowing with a silvery hue. Her eyes were large and almond-shaped, her features otherworldly yet captivating. Two delicate antennae twitched atop her head. Define damaged, he stammered, rubbing his head. The alien tilted her head, her expression curious. You are leaking red fluid. Is this a sign of disassembly? Jake glanced at the cut on his arm. It's called blood. And no, I'm not falling apart. What are you? I am Zyra, she replied, stepping closer. You are, primitive. She poked at his arm with a glowing finger. And squishy. Thanks for the ego boost, Jake deadpanned. Zyra's antennae twitched again. You vibrate at a fascinating frequency. Perhaps I should recalibrate you. Yeah, let's not, Jake said, inching back. Zyra crouched down, inspecting him like a curious child examining a bug. Your energy field is unstable. You require immediate stabilization. Stabilization? Jake asked, eyeing her warily. What does that mean exactly? Without waiting for an answer, Zyra produced a small, glowing device from her waist. Do not resist. This will only penetrate slightly. Wait, penetrate, what? Jake tried to scramble away, but Zyra pressed the device against his chest. A sharp jolt shot through him, and everything went dark. When he came to, Jake felt different. He groaned, sitting up. His senses were heightened, almost overloaded. He could feel the faint hum of the planet beneath him, the breeze on his skin, but there was something else. Good. You are operational again, Zyra said, standing over him. Jake blinked. What did you do to me? I integrated your consciousness into mine, she said matter-of-factly. Jake froze. I'm sorry, you did what now? You were unstable, Zyra explained. To preserve you, I interfaced with your neural patterns. Your essence now resides within me. Jake's brain struggled to keep up. Are you telling me I'm inside you? Zyra nodded. Correct. Your presence is unusual, but not unpleasant. Jake ran a hand through his hair, trying to process. Okay, hold up. You can't just stick me inside you without asking. Zyra blinked. Would you have preferred external suspension? That would have been Messier. That's not what never mind, Jake groaned. As he got to his feet, Jake realized something was off. He could feel Zyra's movements as if they were his own. When she turned her head, he felt the shift. When she flexed her fingers, his own twitched involuntarily. Whoa, what's happening here? He asked, panicked. Zyra tilted her head, studying him. Our neural bond allows us to share sensory input. Is this problematic? Problematic? Yeah, you could say that. Jake snapped. I don't need to feel your, whatever this is. Zyra's antennae twitched. You are experiencing my biofeedback loop. Fascinating. Does this not enhance your understanding of me? Jake groaned, rubbing his temples. I don't need enhanced understanding. I need a one-way ticket off this planet. That is not feasible, Zyra said calmly. Your primitive vessel is irreparable. You must adapt. Adapt? Lady, I'm barely holding it together here. Zyra's lips curved slightly, her version of a smile. Your vocal emissions are amusing. Are all humans this chaotic? Jake threw up his hands. Great. Now I'm comic relief. As they walked, or rather, as Zyra walked and Jake felt every step like it was his own, the situation grew even stranger. Jake discovered he could influence Zyra's movements, albeit clumsily. Stop doing that, Zyra said as her arm jerked sideways. I'm not doing it on purpose. Jake protested. You must focus. Your lack of control is inefficient. Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Perfect. Maybe if you hadn't shoved me into your brain, I'd be a little more coordinated. Zyra regarded him with a calm curiosity that only irritated him further. Your agitation increases neural noise. I recommend relaxation techniques. Yeah? And I recommend you unfuse us. Zyra sighed, a soft, melodic sound. Unfortunate. Separation is currently impossible. We must remain conjoined until I can access the core of Altherax. And where's that? Jake asked. Several planetary rotations away, Zyra replied. Jake groaned. Of course it is. As they continued, Jake couldn't help but notice how bizarrely intimate the experience was. He felt Zyra's curiosity, her amusement, even her mild annoyance at his outbursts. Stop thinking so loudly, she said abruptly. What? How am I thinking loudly? Your neural emissions are disruptive. They make my antennae tingle. Jake smirked despite himself. You're saying I get under your skin? Zyra frowned, clearly missing the joke. No. You are inside me, not beneath my dermal layer. Jake chuckled. This is gonna be a long trip. Jake sighed, trying to focus as they trekked through the alien landscape, but Zyra's incessant curiosity made it impossible. Explain this love phenomenon, she asked, her voice as clinical as ever. Jake groaned. Do we have to do this now? Yes, Zyra said simply. Your neural patterns suggest it is a pivotal human function. It's complicated, Jake muttered, rubbing his temples. It's about connection, feelings, chemistry. Zyra tilted her head. Chemistry? Are human relationships governed by molecular reactions? Well, technically, yeah, but it's more than that, Jake tried. She stopped abruptly, causing Jake to feel her confusion ripple through their shared link. Your description lacks precision. Provide an example. Jake hesitated, then reluctantly admitted, fine. Love is when you care about someone so much, you'd do anything for them. You feel it in your gut. Zyra's eyes widened. Your digestive system is involved? Jake groaned. No. It's a metaphor. Ah, she said, nodding sagely. So love is a metaphorical gastrointestinal disturbance? Jake couldn't stop himself from laughing. You're impossible. Zyra's antennae twitched, signaling her amusement. Your vocal emissions indicate pleasure. I am succeeding. Yeah, sure, you're a real Casanova, Jake muttered. Zyra paused, her curiosity spiking. Who is this Casanova? A revered figure in human bonding rituals? Jake shook his head, realizing how futile this conversation was. Forget it. Let's just keep moving. But Zyra wasn't done. As they walked, she began sifting through his memories, her voice filtering through their link. Your recollections of coupling are intriguing. Why does your species engage in rhythmic swaying before mating? Jake froze, horrified. Whoa! Stay out of those memories. Zyra looked genuinely puzzled. They are relevant to my research. Your species' pre-mating displays involve excessive movement and repetitive vocalizations. Is this to ensure compatibility? Jake covered his face with his hands. Oh my God. It's called dancing, and it's not, ugh, never mind. Zyra, of course, ignored him. Your species appears inefficient. Etherealites form bonds through neural synchronization, bypassing unnecessary theatrics. Good for you, Jake said, exasperated. Can we talk about literally anything else? She tilted her head again, considering. Very well. Explain the function of flirting. Jake couldn't help laughing at the absurdity of the situation. It's just a way of showing interest in someone, okay? It's playful. Zyra's gaze sharpened. Playful? Does this mean it is not serious? Not exactly, Jake said, struggling to find the right words. It's like testing the waters. Zyra nodded, her expression thoughtful. I see. Flirting is analogous to conducting experiments to gauge compatibility. Jake sighed. Sure, let's go with that. Moments later, Zyra turned to him, her tone strangely formal. Jake, I find your neural emissions stimulating. Are we compatible? Jake stumbled over his words. What? No! That's not. Your heart rate is elevated, Zyra noted, leaning closer. Does this indicate interest? Jake stepped back, waving his hands. No. It means I'm freaking out. Zyra frowned, her antennae twitching. Fascinating. Human reactions are far less predictable than I anticipated. As they continued their journey, Zyra grew bolder in her attempts to test human interaction. At one point, she plucked a glowing alien flower and offered it to Jake. What's this for? He asked suspiciously. In your memories, this gesture appears significant, she explained. Does it elicit pleasure? Jake hesitated, then smiled despite himself. It's thoughtful. Thanks. Before he could fully appreciate the moment, the flower released a puff of spores into his face, making him sneeze violently. Zyra tilted her head. Was that a positive response? Jake coughed, his eyes watering. Yeah, sure. Positive. Later, as they rested near a glowing pond, Zyra's curiosity took a more awkward turn. Human anatomy is perplexing. Your limb arrangement is inefficient for climbing. Jake chuckled. We're built for other things, like running. And thumbs. Thumbs are awesome. Zyra studied her own hands, flexing her slender fingers. Your obsession with grasping objects is peculiar. Is this related to mating rituals? Jake stared at her. Why do you keep bringing everything back to mating? It is a primary function in most species, Zyra said matter-of-factly. Should it not be prioritized? Jake buried his face in his hands. I need a drink. Zyra brightened. Ah, your memories of liquid consumption rituals. Would you prefer the bubbling substance or the amber liquid that causes erratic behavior? Jake couldn't help laughing. Definitely the second one. Her antennae twitched. Humor detected. I am improving, yes? Sure, Zyra, Jake said, shaking his head. You're a real comedian. Her lips curved slightly in what he now recognized as her version of a smile. Excellent. Shall we proceed? Lead the way, Jake said, resigning himself to the chaos. As they resumed their journey, Jake couldn't help but marvel at how surreal his life had become. Here he was, bonded to a hyper-curious alien scientist who couldn't grasp the concept of personal boundaries. Yet, despite the endless awkwardness, he found himself smiling. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to enjoy the ride. Jake trudged along the alien terrain, trying to ignore the persistent buzzing in his head. Their shared neural connection was becoming a constant source of confusion. Every time Zyra thought about something, Jake caught snippets of her curiosity and observations. It was like having an overenthusiastic commentator inside his brain. Your bipedal motion is inefficient, Zyra noted suddenly. Jake groaned. Can you stop critiquing my walking? I've been doing it my whole life. But your gait is asymmetrical, she insisted. One leg appears to carry more weight. Is this a sign of impending structural failure? Jake stopped in his tracks. No, it's a sign that I twisted my ankle when you threw me into a rock earlier. Zyra blinked, her antennae twitching. Ah. I see. This is my fault. Yeah, no kidding, Jake muttered. Zyra's expression shifted to what Jake could only describe as amused curiosity. Human resilience is remarkable. Despite your physical limitations, you persist. Thanks, I think, Jake replied, rolling his eyes. As they continued, Zyra suddenly froze. Jake felt the jolt through their connection, like an electric shock. What's wrong? He asked. There's an approaching life form, Zyra said, her tone calm but alert. Jake squinted at the horizon and saw a massive, insect-like creature lumbering toward them. It had too many legs, glowing eyes, and mandibles that clicked ominously. Oh, great, Jake muttered. What is that thing? A territorial aggressor, Zyra said, already stepping forward. I will handle this. Jake reached out instinctively, grabbing her arm. Wait. What do you mean, handle? That thing looks like it eats people for fun. Zyra looked down at his hand on her arm, then back at him, her expression unreadable. You doubt my capabilities? No, I doubt my ability to not get eaten while you play hero, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. Zyra's antennae twitched again, this time in what Jake suspected was amusement. Your fear is misplaced. Observe. Before Jake could protest further, Zyra extended her hand, and a soft glow emanated from her palm. The creature halted mid-stride, its mandibles clicking uncertainly. What are you doing? Jake hissed. Establishing dominance, Zyra replied. Jake snorted despite himself. Oh, sure. Just walk up to the giant bug and give it a stern talking to. To his astonishment, the creature lowered itself to the ground, its many legs folding beneath it. It let out a low, rumbling sound that could only be described as submissive. Well, I'll be damned, Jake said, staring. Zyra turned to him, her lips curving in that faint smile. As you can see, there was no need for concern. Yeah, you're amazing, Jake muttered. Can we keep moving now? As they left the subdued creature behind, Zyra began analyzing Jake's emotional response. Your fear reaction was disproportionate. Why did you assume I would fail? I didn't assume you'd fail, Jake said defensively. I assumed I'd get squished while you figured things out. Zyra's antennae twitched. Your self-preservation instincts are fascinating. They often override logic. Welcome to being human, Jake muttered. Zyra fell silent for a moment, then asked, Do you always rely on humor to mask fear? Jake blinked, caught off guard by the question. What? No. I mean, maybe. It's just how I deal with things, okay? Interesting, Zyra said, tilting her head. Humor as a defense mechanism. Perhaps I should incorporate this into my interactions. Good luck with that, Jake said, shaking his head. A few minutes later, Zyra attempted her first joke. Jake, why did the primitive human not flee from the territorial aggressor? Jake raised an eyebrow. Why? Because he was too busy miscalculating his survival odds, Zyra said with a completely straight face. Jake stared at her for a moment, then burst out laughing. That's terrible. But I'll give you points for trying. Zyra's antennae twitched again, signaling satisfaction. Progress. They continued walking, and Jake couldn't help but notice how seamlessly they were beginning to work together. Despite her constant stream of questions and observations, Zyra was genuinely trying to understand him. So, Jake said after a while, what's your deal, anyway? Why are you out here on this planet all alone? Zyra hesitated, and for the first time, Jake felt a hint of vulnerability through their link. I am different, she admitted. My methods are unconventional. Others find them disruptive. Jake smirked. Welcome to the club. Zyra glanced at him, her expression softening. You understand. Yeah, Jake said, surprised by his own honesty. I guess I do. They fell into a comfortable silence, and for the first time, Jake felt a strange sense of connection with his alien companion. Thank you, Jake, Zyra said suddenly. For what? He asked. For tolerating my disruptions, she said. Jake chuckled. Tolerating you? Lady, you're the only reason I'm still alive. I think I owe you one. Zyra's antennae twitched in amusement. Perhaps we are more compatible than I anticipated. Jake rolled his eyes but couldn't hide his smile. Don't get used to it. As they pressed on, Jake realized that, despite the chaos and awkwardness, he didn't mind the journey so much anymore. Zyra might be the most infuriating being he'd ever met, but she was also the most fascinating. And, for better or worse, they were in this together. Jake slumped against a tree, the alien jungle humming softly around them. Zyra knelt beside him, her antennae flicking as she scanned his vitals through their neural link. Her expression was unusually tense, though Jake couldn't tell if it was concern or just intense focus. You've expended too much energy, Zyra said, her tone as clinical as ever. No kidding, Jake replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. Maybe if someone had warned me about the flesh-eating plants, I'd have paced myself. Zyra tilted her head. Your sarcasm is noted. However, I did warn you about the flora's defensive mechanisms. Jake rolled his eyes. Saying, the plants here may consume organic matter, isn't exactly a warning. It's more like a creepy observation. Zyra straightened, her antennae twitching slightly. Human communication relies too heavily on emotional inference. I shall adjust my approach. Great. Looking forward to that, Jake muttered, leaning back. As Zyra busied herself collecting materials for a makeshift shelter, Jake couldn't help but marvel at her efficiency. Despite her often bewildering curiosity, she was undeniably competent. Watching her work was both impressive and, if he admitted it, a little intimidating. Are you always this driven? He asked after a while. Zyra didn't look up. Survival requires focus. Yeah, but you're not just surviving, Jake said. You're cataloging, analyzing, experimenting. Don't you ever take a break? Zyra paused, considering his words. Breaks are counterproductive. Not if you want to stay sane, Jake countered. Zyra finally looked at him, her expression thoughtful. Your neural patterns suggest you believe leisure is integral to mental stability. Jake smirked. I'm saying you should try relaxing once in a while. Who knows? You might even enjoy it. To his surprise, Zyra set down her materials and sat beside him. Very well. Teach me this, relaxation. Jake blinked. Okay. Well, for starters, you just sit still and stop thinking about survival for 5 minutes. Zyra frowned. Ceasing critical thought seems unwise. It's not about shutting down completely, Jake explained. It's about letting yourself breathe. Take in the moment, you know? Zyra's antennae twitched as she processed this. This appears inefficient. Just try it, Jake urged. She closed her eyes, her posture unnaturally stiff. For a few seconds, she remained perfectly still, and Jake began to think she might actually be relaxing. Then her eyes snapped open. I cannot do this, she declared. My cognitive processes require continuous input. Jake laughed. You're hopeless. Zyra tilted her head. Is this another form of human humor? Mockery to mask disappointment? Jake chuckled. No, it's just, you're so different from anyone I've ever met. I don't know whether to be impressed or terrified half the time. Zyra's lips curved in that faint smile. Your reactions are equally perplexing. Despite your limitations, you exhibit remarkable adaptability. Jake raised an eyebrow. Was that a compliment? An observation, Zyra replied, though her antennae twitched with amusement. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the alien jungle humming softly around them. Then Zyra turned to him, her curiosity sparking again. Explain the human concept of companionship, she said. Jake sighed. You really can't turn it off, can you? I find your species' social structures intriguing, Zyra admitted. Companionship appears to be a critical element of human well-being. Jake nodded slowly. Yeah, it is. People need people. It's how we get through the tough stuff. Zaira considered this. And yet, you appear to function independently. Not by choice, Jake said quietly. Her expression softened, and for once, she didn't press further. Instead, she reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture surprisingly gentle. Perhaps, she said after a moment, companionship is not exclusive to your species. Jake looked at her, surprised. Are you saying we're friends? Zaira's antennae twitched. The term is inadequate, but it will suffice. Jake laughed, shaking his head. Well, that's a first. Never thought I'd bond with an alien scientist who doesn't understand personal space. Your humor persists, even in moments of vulnerability, Zaira noted. This is an admirable trait. Thanks, I guess, Jake said, smiling. As the alien suns began to set, casting the jungle in hues of gold and crimson, Jake realized something unexpected. Despite the chaos, the confusion, and the constant awkwardness, he didn't feel so alone anymore. Hey, Zaira, he said, breaking the silence. Yes, Jake? Thanks for sticking with me. I mean it. Zaira tilted her head, her expression unreadable. It is logical. Your survival ensures the continuation of my research. Jake smirked. And here I thought you were getting sentimental. Her antennae twitched, and he could have sworn there was a flicker of amusement in her eyes. Sentimentality is a human flaw. I am simply efficient. Jake laughed, shaking his head. Whatever you say, Zaira. Whatever you say. As the stars began to fill the sky, Jake leaned back, letting the surreal beauty of the moment wash over him. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to understand her. And in her own strange way, she was starting to understand him too.